alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
Hey everybody, Nicky Joe here. Welcome to this week's episode of Alternative Experience. We're cooking with gas now. We're well into the 30s, which I'm very happy about with regards to episodes, and that there's lots more to come. But this week's podcast, I want to really sort of continue a previous theme that I've kind of touched upon with regards to understanding the human condition. Now, obviously, this is from my perspective. This is from my own personal experience in life, from watching my kids grow up and seeing their sort of behaviors form, etc. But more importantly, from all of my clients that I've seen in my coaching course in the last 6 years, I've seen this pattern in every single person. And it's very relevant to the nervous system imbalance that we're all feeling, this search for the authentic life, which I know sounds a bit fluffy to some people. What that basically just means is finding the life that you were born to live rather than trying to sort of act your way through life. You know, this shouldn't be an act. It should be very natural. But this is just another thought exercise in that vein. So please entertain me. This is mostly for people that have children, but by all means listen to it if you don't, because I'm sure you can relate. But do any of you that have kids, do your kids ever do that thing when, let's say for instance, you want to introduce them to a new food that you know they're going to love, but they refuse it? And even though they never tried it, they go even further and say, I don't like it. You know, it doesn't stop there. They get really stubborn about it, and for months on end, they'll refuse all of your attempts to introduce it to them, until one day they're at school and their best friend's got the same food, and what do you know? They try it and they love it, and it's now all they want to eat. Well, while these behaviours are usually and very, very often just your child sort of pushing their boundaries, finding out where their boundaries are, if you kind of notice this kind of pattern of behaviour for any period of time, I really do recommend that you look at it and try and deal with it. And in this podcast, I hope to kind of articulate why. Now, like I said just now, since I started my coaching course around 6 years ago, every single client that I've seen, without an exception, has had some kind of negative behavior, experience, thought process, belief issue, whatever you want to call, that was actually seeded in either their childhood or at least their younger years. And I suppose with the help of the journaling and talk therapy, which is part of my coaching course, we kind of focus on identifying and sort of accepting and acknowledging that. And then obviously once we start working on it, the issues that they came to see me about initially, whether it be anxiety, stress, whatever it might be, those kind of evaporate completely. They're no longer on the radar. It really does become about this particular event. And what I've worked out is what is seeded in childhood, if it's left unaddressed, it will become ingrained in your adulthood. But naturally, it will also get progressively worse. Now, I use the example of if you were in the building trade. If you were doing a straight line and you're a millimetre out at the start, you're going to be a metre, 2 metres, 5 metres out by the end. And it's very, very similar with this. So if you think about things like limiting beliefs, low self-esteem, nervous behaviours, underachievement, anything along those lines, they're just a few of the minor examples. Now, childhood trauma, I know obviously people are throwing this word trauma around left, right and centre, but childhood trauma is a very real thing. But what's really important to understand is it's not always about severe abuse. It's not always about some kind of extremely traumatic experience. Your trauma is your trauma. It can also be very subtle experiences, like you could have been a child that had certain prominent behaviours, and they were slowly but surely drummed out of you by either your parents or adult caregivers around you with all those constant, no, stop, don't do it, stop this. Now, as a kid, when you're hearing all this negative feedback all the time, it affects you. You start to think that you're in some way deficient. And then eventually during that domestication, you will actually take the reins and continue to domesticate yourself. Now, whatever your issue may be, let's stay on the stubborn example that we started the podcast with. What may start off as genuinely a stubborn behavior, like a young person's first act of rebellion, that can often become an ingrained behavior, and we can actually go through our lives as a result avoiding experiences, not participating, and this just grows and grows as we age. So what started out as, let's say, saying no to food starts to become no to playing, then it becomes no to socializing, and then eventually no to participating altogether. And then we find ourselves trapped deep in a comfort zone, work, eat, sleep, repeat. It's not living. No matter what we tell ourselves, that is not living. Now, we do this ironically through fear. Now, I know that might sound a bit of a stretch, but let me sort of kind of explain that. It's with regards to our biology. Now, back in our hunter-gatherer days, fear would have been a very healthy thing to us to have, to avoid predation and general danger. But rather than constantly living our lives in fear, we would have kind of relied far more upon intuition, the sympathetic nervous system, those systems that are there to keep us safe. Very, very powerful systems, very powerful tools when they're used in the right way, acknowledged, respected and understood. However, as our dangers have kind of reduced, as we've kind of obviously got into a much more safe environment, so things like natural predators are not really out there, I suppose you could say this system has kind of either been hijacked, or at the very least we've forgotten how to use it, we've forgotten how to understand it. We now live in a world full of minor yet perpetual fear. So, I don't know, fear of poverty, fear of social isolation, fear of rejection, fear of failure, a fear of losing everything. We're constantly in this low-grade fear. I suppose you could say a lot of us suffer with a fear of life itself. And I think because we don't have this understanding of our biology, we don't understand the signals it's sending to us. Now, that fear is merely our nervous system. Like I said, our fight or flight mode. And while it's extremely important for our survival, it is actually highly detrimental for anyone to be in for any prolonged periods of time. And I've covered this in other podcasts, so by all means look at the other information where we deep dive the nervous system. But what we need to recognize is 98% of the population are spending the majority of their lives stuck in this fight or flight. And as such, everybody's retreating deeper and deeper into this comfort zone, and they're avoiding all of life's experiences. And they feel safe, but they don't feel happy. They feel completely out of balance. But why is it that so many of us, I suppose, fall into this trap? Now, despite what you might think, anybody listening at home there, this issue affects everybody, irrelevant of your financial or social background. In fact, I actually see more so-called successful people in my practice. And the reason for this is no matter what you make and no matter what you're worth, we all have the same biology. So we're all going to be affected in the same way when it comes to negative experiences, negative thought patterns, etc. Now, they were all slowly ingrained upon us over decades. And as such, they kind of go under the radar, especially when it comes to their involvement in the formation of sort of downstream health issues. But once they're there, the other problem is they can become very difficult or near impossible to address. And as I say, they create this low-grade stress to everything you do. And it really does, as I say, have massive, massive detrimental effects to your overall health, whether it be emotional, physical, or mental. So while it might be very, very hard to deal with them if you don't know about them, the good news is for anybody that is actually ready to take action, it's very, very easy to do so. And like I say, even if you don't know, the best thing to say is if you're suffering with any kind of imbalance, physically, emotionally, mentally, if you just don't feel right, if you're not bouncing out of bed every day, if you're not, grateful for just being alive, then I can actually guarantee they exist. You just need to take a little bit of a leap of faith and have a bit of a determination to identify what it is and deal with those problems. So if you can't identify or commit to dealing with them, it's impossible to escape this mental prison. And you're just going to continue going round and round and round until eventually you just have a load of deathbed regrets. So what's really important to understand is humans are extremely resilient, okay? And we very, very often evolve to live with conditions that aren't beneficial to us. So traits and behaviors that aren't beneficial to us are very much top of that list. Now, this type of trauma is just pushed deep down into the solar plexus, into that energy center down there. It's not just a saying when we say, just push it down and out of sight, out of mind. It's never fully out of mind. So once you identify there is an imbalance, it's very easy to address it as long as you do the work, okay? You don't just go, it's there, now I'm better. You have to do the work to obviously undo those decades long sort of behaviors and traits. Now, for example, in my 6-week coaching program, we introduce very subtle behavioral tweaks and lifestyle changes, and we just ensure that we start putting in new positive behaviors, and they're going to become part of your daily regime by the end of the 6 weeks. It's done kind of drip fed to a point where there's no resistance, and then it just becomes something you do automatically. Now, all of the practices and techniques are free once you know how to do them, and they can be practiced without impacting on your time. They can be done anywhere. But more importantly, they're all science-backed and based solely on understanding your biology. I don't just teach you the how, so how to do certain techniques. I also believe that knowledge is actually the key to true success. So I also teach you the why behind that, why they work so well, why are we affected so badly when we don't practice these techniques, etc. Now, the first 7 years of a child's life is vital. Many of both the positive and negative behavioral traits that they have will be established at this point. And if they're left unchecked, it's just going to be there for life, and they're going to get progressively worse, deepen as they age. Now, with good behaviors, this is never a problem. But when it comes to negative or detrimental behaviors, they really can affect the type of life that these kids get to experience. And as I say, I see it every day in my adult clients. It's a very, very true thing. Joe Rogan has a saying which I love. It's, the worst thing to happen to you is the worst thing to happen to you. Now, a good example of this is as a kid, when you're dumped for the first time, your world comes crashing down. Life is over. That is the worst thing that's happened to you. And it feels as bad as something traumatic that may have happened to somebody else. You only really go up in levels as you experience more traumatic experiences. So don't think that there's any experience out there that isn't worthy of this pivot point that I'm sort of referring to. But change is never too late. But the earlier you can sort of get in there to address any kind of imbalances, the better. Not only will it be less ingrained and it will have affected less of your life, they're also going to be, once you get these new behaviors in, they're going to be enjoyed for longer. You're going to have more good years ahead of you. So if you're intrigued at all and would like to know more, I will leave a link in the podcast description for my calendar. So feel free to book a no obligation discovery call. But that's not the reason for today's podcast. Like I say, that option is there for people. I don't know if people are aware of that. But I'm going to leave you with my motto. Whatever you do, stop surviving every day and start thriving every day. This life really isn't a dress rehearsal. You don't get to do it again. There's no do-overs. And you really do need to make this one count. And on that bombshell, thanks for listening. Please like, share, and comment as always. And if you haven't already, what are you playing at? Hit that subscribe button as soon as possible. Your support really does make a difference. Until the next show, peace out. Cheers, guys.